Before the ball, before the wager, before the orphan in the borrowed gown was carried up the staircase on the dowager's arm, there is the room where the wager was written. London in mid-November is at its narrowest and most candle-bright. The fog comes down at 4 in the afternoon and does not lift again until the next morning. The parks are emptied of all but the determined. Inside the houses of Mayfair and St. James, the long winter evenings have begun in earnest, and a waltz is being rehearsed somewhere on a top floor. Fires are kept high. Decanters are refilled twice. The men of those houses gather in their clubs and write things in the books that are kept on the green baize tables. Those books look, in daylight, like quiet ledgers. They look, at midnight, like instruments of a small and careful violence. The wager was set down in red ink at 11:30, 3 nights before the Earl of Ashcombe's birthday ball, and the man who wrote it was laughing too loudly to notice his own hand shaking. £500, said Lord Frederick Carey, leaning across the green baize at White's with the slow deliberation of a man who had crossed the line between merry and dangerous an hour earlier. 500 says you cannot... Henry, are you listening? 500 says you cannot invite the most invisible orphan in London to your own ball and have her in your arms before the waltz ends. Henry Ashcombe set down his glass without sound. He had been called Henry by Frederick Carey since they were boys of 7, and he had learned, in the 18 years since, exactly which of Carey's wagers were jests and which were the slow knives that came back to find you in the morning. This was the second sort. He could tell by the way the other 3 at the table, Sir John Penley, Lord Marbury's youngest, and the new American, Whittaker, had gone very still. I do not know any invisible orphans, Henry said, which was true, and also a coward's answer, and he disliked himself for both halves of it. A coal shifted in the grate. Then you must find one. Frederick was already writing. It is the season. There are entire pews of them, charity wards, companions to the bath-going widows. The ones at the back of every drawing-room with mended gloves and no card, who curtsy when they should, and never speak. One of those. You will invite her by name. You will dance with her in front of all of London, and before the orchestra finishes the waltz, you will have made her... What is the elegant word, Penley? The clock on the mantelpiece ticked. Susceptible, said Penley, who did not look up from his own cards. The candles guttered and steadied. Susceptible. Frederick wrote it. We are gentlemen. We do not say compromised. Susceptible. So susceptible that she walks home convinced you mean to ask for her hand. £500, payable Monday. Somewhere in the next room a door closed. The American, Whittaker, said quietly, I do not think I will sit for this one. Sit or rise as you please, Frederick said. The wager stands between Carey and Ashcombe. The rest are witnesses. He turned the book and slid it across. Henry looked at the page. He thought, for one clean moment, of standing up and saying that he would not. He thought of the boy he had been at 13, who had once thrown a punch in this very club for less than what Carey was now writing. He thought of his sister Anne, who at 22 had been laughed at the length of one ballroom by men exactly like this. Men in good coats, with bored mouths, who had cost her a year of confidence she had never entirely won back. But he also thought, with a soundness he could not pretend was not there, of the 8 months since his elder brother's death, of the title that had landed on him like wet wool, of the rooms full of men who now watched him to see how the new Earl of Ashcombe would carry it. He thought of the slow, accumulating boredom of a winter spent saying yes to invitations he did not want and writing letters he did not believe. He thought of how, lately, he had begun to feel that he was a portrait of himself instead of himself. The card room at White's smelled of brandy and beeswax and the slightly sour smoke of the green-shaded reading lamps. A coal settled in the grate behind Henry's shoulder. Somewhere in the next room, a clock chimed the 3/4 hour, 3 thin notes against the steady murmur of the late-night players. Henry felt the brass nib of the offered pen between his thumb and finger, and noticed, with a small inner clarity, the way his own pulse showed at the wrist of his glove. He had been counted since boyhood, a man who did not waste signatures. A bored man and a bad wager are an old story. It has always ended the same way. He signed. The ink stood up on the surface of the page for a half-second before it sank, a small, glossy black ridge that looked, for that moment, as if it might still be lifted off and discarded. Then the ridge dulled, and was paper, and was permanent. "Excellent," said Frederick, blowing the ink. "Now, choose her." He did not look away. "I will choose her in my own time." She did not look away. "You have 3 nights. Anne is calling the dances. Anne will arrange the waltz at 11 for you. That gives you, what, 600 seconds to make a girl who has never been asked for so much as a quadrille feel that the Earl of Ashcombe is on the verge of declaring himself. Do not be late, Henry. I do not like to lose." He drew a breath. "Nor do I." He took the pen from Frederick's hand, set it down precisely in its cradle, and rose to leave. At the door he stopped and added, without turning, 500 for me if I succeed. What for her? Frederick laughed. What for her? She gets to say she danced with the Earl of Ashcombe. Henry walked out into St. James's Street, and did not remember afterwards whether it had been raining. Catherine Merrow received the engraved card on Friday afternoon in the back parlour of No. 8 Bryanston Square, where she had lived for 2.5 years as paid companion to the Dowager Lady Esme Cottingham, and she stared at it long enough that the Dowager, who had been pretending to nap, opened one eye. The back parlour of No. 8 was a low-ceilinged, north-facing room with 2 windows that gave onto the small paved area behind the house. The walls were papered in a faded green pattern that the Dowager had chosen when Pitt was still Prime Minister. There was a coal fire in the grate, kept low because the Dowager preferred her rooms cool, and a small mahogany table between the 2 chairs, and on the mantelpiece, a row of 3 Staffordshire dogs, 2 of which were chipped. The afternoon light through the windows was the colour of weak tea. Outside, in the area, the kitchen maid was scraping a saucepan. "What is it, child? You have gone the colour of an unbaked scone." She drew a breath. "It is—" Kit Merrow set the card on the small table between them, because her fingers had begun to feel untrustworthy. "It is an invitation." The silence lasted 2 beats longer than was comfortable. "Whose invitation?" "The Earl of Ashcombe's." "Whose?" "The Earl of—" "I heard you the first time." Lady Esme, who was 81 and had outlived 4 husbands and 2 physicians, sat up straight against her cushions with the speed of a much younger woman. "Read it to me. Both sides. Slowly." Kit picked it up again. The card was thick. The script on it was the kind of round, even copperplate that meant a secretary had been paid to do it, which meant the household had not even been bothered to know whom they were inviting. Her name had been added in a second, looser hand at the top. Miss Catherine Merrow. "The Earl of Ashcombe," she read, "requests the honour of Miss Catherine Merrow's company at a ball given in celebration of his birthday on Saturday the 17th of November at his house in Berkeley Square. Dancing at 9, supper at midnight, carriages at 3. Reply to Lady Anne Ashcombe at the same address." Lady Esme said nothing for a count of perhaps 6 seconds, which in her case was almost a speech. Then she said, "What did you do, Catherine?" The fire ticked. "Do? To deserve this card?" "Nothing, ma'am. I have not been near Berkeley Square in my life. I do not know the Earl of Ashcombe. I do not know Lady Anne. I do not— I am quite certain there has been a mistake." Her gloves whitened in her lap. "There has not been a mistake." The Dowager picked up the card herself, held it close to her good eye, turned it over twice. "The footman who brought it had Ashcombe livery. I saw it through the window. He did not look like a man delivering a thing he believed to be erroneous." His fingers closed once around the rim of his glass. "Then it is a jest." "That is possible." Lady Esme set the card down very gently, as if it might break. "It is also possible that it is not. You will accept." Outside, in the square, a carriage rolled past. "Mom, I cannot. I have no gown. I have no chaperone of the kind a ball requires. The rain on the windowpane sounded suddenly very loud. "You have a gown." Lady Esme's voice carried the flat precision of a magistrate, handing down sentence. "It is in the attic of this house, in a black trunk, wrapped in tissue paper, where it has been since my last surviving daughter went into mourning and would not look at it. It is a color that will not have come into fashion for 40 years, and will not have gone out for 40 more. It is the color, child, of a stained glass window at evensong. You will wear it. You have a chaperone, me. Wheel me in or carry me. I shall be there. You have a face that has been wasted for 2.5 years on my embroidery silks. You will accept." "Lady Esme, what if it is a jest?" The old woman looked at her for a long moment, and Kit saw, with a small lurch, that her eyes had grown bright in the way they did only when she was angry on someone else's behalf. "Then, my dear, you will be the best-dressed jest in Berkeley Square, and you will laugh longer than they do. You are 24 years old. You have been kept in a parlor like a piece of china for 2 years too many. You will go." The orphan part was true. Kit's father had been a country clergyman in Devon. Her mother had been the second daughter of a Welsh apothecary, which was to say her mother had been, in the eyes of London, no one at all. Both had been carried off by the same fever within a fortnight, when Kit was 19. The living had not been hers to inherit. The cottage had not been hers to keep. What had been hers, after the small economies were settled, was £118, a trunk of books, her father's wedding ring on a chain about her neck, and the address of an old schoolfellow of her father's, a clergyman in Bayswater, who had taken her in. It was the Bayswater rector who had found her the position with Lady Esme. Kit had thought, when she came, that she would stay a year and then look for a place as a governess. She had stayed 2.5. She had learned that the dowager did not need a companion, so much as someone who could read aloud without making the syllables tired. She had learned the names of 50 kinds of wallpaper, the political history of 3 Welsh boroughs, and how to win at piquet against a woman who cheated. She had not been to a ball. She had not, in fact, been into any room of more than 6 people, except church, where she sat at the back and was not noticed. She was not invisible because she was plain. She knew this in the cold way one knows one's own face. She had her father's bones and her mother's mouth, and an unbecoming habit of laughing at the wrong things, which made strangers occasionally turn around in shops to see who had laughed. She was invisible because she had been put in a category: paid companion, parsonage daughter, no fortune, and out of that category nobody had thought to lift her. Until, apparently, somebody had. The attic of number 8 Bryanston Square was reached by a steep wooden staircase that smelled of dry timber and lavender oil. The room itself, under the roof, was lit by a single round window in the gable end, which threw a coin of dusty sunlight onto the bare boards. 5 trunks stood along the far wall, 3 brown, 1 tin, 1 black, the black one banded in tarnished brass and slightly smaller than the others. The smell in the room was of camphor and old wool, and faintly, beneath those, of dried rose petals from a sachet that had long since lost its scent and never been thrown away. Mrs. Pierce went directly to the black trunk and knelt on one knee beside it, and undid the catches, and lifted the lid. Saturday morning she stood in the attic of number 8 Bryanston Square, while Lady Esme's lady's maid, Mrs. Pierce, opened the black trunk and lifted out the gown, and Kit understood immediately what the dowager had meant about the colour. It was not red, it was not crimson. It was the deep, breathing scarlet of garnets in candlelight, the red that lived inside old cathedral glass when the late afternoon hit it sideways. The silk was heavy and faintly worn at one cuff. There were small, perfectly worked gold thread flowers at the hem, in a pattern Kit did not recognize. "It will need taking in at the bodice," said Mrs. Pierce, who had not smiled in 3 years, and who now allowed herself, briefly, to smile. "But not by much. It will fit you, miss. It will fit you exactly." A footman in the hall coughed and was hushed. Kit said, "I do not understand." He set his hand on the back of the chair. "What do you not understand, miss?" She set her hand on the back of the chair. "Why, she—" Kit could not finish. Mrs. Pierce held the gown against her own arm and considered it. "Lady Esme buried 4 husbands and 2 children, miss. She is not in the habit of giving away her own clothes. When she does, she means it." She paused. "And she has not liked Lord Frederick Carey for 40 years. I do not know what that has to do with anything. I only mention it." Kit looked at her. Mrs. Pierce gathered up the gown. "I do not gossip, miss. I only mention what is in the wind." That afternoon, Kit found Lady Esme in her chair by the fire, with the invitation card on her knee, turning it over in her thin fingers. "Lady Esme?" Kit said. "Yes." Mrs. Pierce mentioned a name. He looked at the floor. Mrs. Pierce should keep her stays laced and her mouth shut. She looked at the window. "Lord Frederick Carey." Lady Esme considered the card a moment longer. "Sit down, child." Kit sat. "There are 2 kinds of wagers laid at White's Club," said Lady Esme. "There are the foolish kind, racing one's curricle to Brighton, the colour of the next baby, and there are the unkind kind. I do not have proof of anything. I have only ears, and a friend whose grandson is a footman there. Yesterday morning, a young woman's name was entered in that book." She looked up at Kit. "I do not know whose name. I am old, and the world keeps less of itself from me than it used to. But when a card arrives at my door for a girl in my keeping, 3 days later, with no warning and no introduction, I notice. Do you understand me?" Kit understood her. The warmth had gone out of her hands. She set them, palms down, against the cool wood of the chair's arm, and made herself feel the grain of it. "I will not go." "You will go." Lady Esme reached across and took her hand. The old fingers were cold, and the grip was iron. "You will go because if you do not, they will simply choose another girl, and she will have neither my trunk in the attic nor my carriage at the door. You will go because the only response to that sort of wager is to walk in dressed like a window in Chartres and let them all look at you and feel for 1/4 hour the size of the thing they have done. You will go because I will be there, and you will go because I have lived 81 years, and I will tell you the truest thing I know about young men who lay foolish wagers in their cups. They are not always the men who carry them out. Sometimes, the man who wrote the wager is one man, and the man who arrives at the ball is another, and the second man is the one to watch." He looked at her hands. Kit said, "And if they are the same man?" Lady Esme's mouth thinned. "Then we will see him out, my dear, with his face very red, and we will laugh on the carriage home." She squeezed Kit's hand once and let it go. "Now," she said, "Mrs. Pierce will dress your hair, and I will see whether my old emerald earrings still close, and you will write her acceptance, and you will not, Catherine, you will not go into that ball afraid. You will go in curious. Curiosity is the only proper armor against men like Carey. Fear is what they expect. Curiosity is what they cannot bear." Kit picked up the pen. She wrote, "Miss Catherine Merrow presents her compliments to the Earl of Ashcombe and accepts with thanks his kind invitation for Saturday next." Her hand did not shake. She made sure of it. She would shake on her own time. After. Berkeley Square at 8:30 on the night of the 17th of November was a long, slow river of carriages. The horses steamed in the cold. Link boys with smoking torches went between the carriage doors and the steps of the houses, calling each name to the footman at the gate, who repeated it up to a second footman in the hall, who repeated it again to the house steward, who said the spelling of it correctly upon a card. The windows of the Ashcombe house threw yellow squares onto the wet stone of the square below, and a faint hum of music drifted out into the street whenever a door was opened, and was cut off again whenever it was shut. Inside, on the great curving staircase, Lord Henry Ashcombe was standing exactly where his sister Anne had told him to stand, which was 3 steps down from the landing, with one hand on the banister and the other resting on nothing. And he was discovering that he could not feel either of them. "Stop it," said Anne from his elbow. She looked at her hands. "Stop what?" "Whatever you're doing with your face. You look like a man waiting to be sentenced. Smile." He smiled. "That is worse," said Anne. "Try again." He tried again. Anne Ashcombe was 26. She was the only person in the world who had ever spoken to him as if he were a small boy in need of being told a thing twice, and she had not stopped speaking to him so when he became Earl. He loved her for it more than he had ever told her. "Anne." "Yes?" "If a girl comes up that staircase tonight, and her name is Miss Catherine Merrow." The lamp on the table threw a small, steady oval of light. "I know her name. I added it to the list myself. You told me to." Anne's eyes did not move. "Yes. If she does not appear, I want you to find out, very quietly, where she lives, and tomorrow morning we will send round a note and an apology." Mrs. Pierce in the doorway did not move either. "For what?" "For inviting her in the first place." Anne looked at him. She had the same grey eyes their mother had had, quiet, capable of going very cold. "Henry, why did you invite her in the first place?" He could not say it. The shape of it on his tongue was unbearable. "Henry." "Carey," he said. Anne went still. "For how much?" 500. "Henry." "I know." "You signed." "I know." Anne took a slow breath. She did not raise her voice. Anne never raised her voice. It was, Henry had long since concluded, the principal reason most people were afraid of her. "And what is your plan?" "I do not know." "That is not a plan." "No." "Did Carey choose her?" "No, I chose her. From a list of charity subscribers I read in the Times. Penley said something about that being decent of me, as if there were a decent way to do it." The dowager's mouth tightened by a hair. Anne closed her eyes. When she opened them again, she said, "Listen to me. If this girl appears, and she carries herself like a woman who does not know she has been wagered upon, you will be kind to her. Do you hear me? You will dance with her once. You will see her supper. You will return her to her chaperone. You will pay Carey the 500 without flinching, and you will tell him, in front of every man at this house, that you have lost. And then we will spend the rest of the season repairing whatever damage you have done." He weighed the next word for a count of 3. And if she appears knowing, then you must hope she is a more forgiving woman than I am, brother, because I should not be." The footman at the door called out a name, and another, and another. Henry watched them mount the stairs in their pairs and their threes. The orchestra in the long room behind him was tuning. He could hear the violins finding each other. At 9, the called names began to be the ones he had been listening for and dreading. Penley arrived alone, in a coat the colour of port. Whittaker, the American, came with his sister, who was pretty. Frederick Carey arrived with 2 of his cousins from Norfolk, all 3 of them flushed from the carriage, and Frederick raised one gloved hand to Henry across the heads of the crowd in a small, ironic salute. At 20 minutes past 9, the footman at the door said, very evenly, "Lady Esme Cottingham, Miss Catherine Merrow." Henry turned. She came up the stairs slowly, because the dowager beside her was leaning hard on her arm, and they had to come at the dowager's pace. The dowager wore black bombazine and 3 rows of jet and an extremely small, extremely furious diamond brooch at her throat. The girl beside her wore garnet silk that moved like the inside of a fire, and her hair was the color of bracken in October, and she was looking, not down at her gloves like the other unwed girls, but up, at the painted ceiling, at the chandelier, at the railing of the balustrade, with the open, particular curiosity of a person who had decided that she would notice everything. She did not look at him. She had not yet seen him. She came up the last step. The dowager said something quiet to her, and the girl bent her ear to listen, and laughed once, a low, surprised laugh that ran along the back of Henry's neck the way wind runs along water. He thought, "Oh." He thought, "I have made a serious mistake." The dowager, Lady Esme Cottingham, raised her chin and turned her head and looked, with both pale blue eyes, directly at Henry Ashcombe, as if she had known precisely where he was standing all along. She did not nod. She did not smile. She held his gaze for 1 full count of 4, and then moved past him into the ballroom, drawing Miss Catherine Merrow with her like a flame drawn into a darker room. Anne, beside him, said very softly, "Henry, breathe." He breathed. The trouble with a wager of this sort, Henry discovered in the next quarter hour, was that he did not know what its rules required him to look like. If he crossed the room to her too soon, every man at White's would mark him for it. If he stayed away, Kerry would assume he had lost his nerve. If he came up to her with the formal, cool politeness one used for an aged dowager's young companion, she would feel it as condescension, and that would be the worst of all the choices. He stood, instead, on the edge of the ballroom and watched her, and tried to think. She was not pretending. That was the first thing he understood. She was not pretending to be at ease, and she was not pretending to be ill at ease either. She was simply being whatever she was, in a color that took the candlelight and turned it deeper. And she was answering the dowager's quiet observations with a tilt of her head, and the kind of half-smile that made the dowager smile back. A footman had brought her a small glass of cordial. She did not drink it. She held it the way one holds an object one has been given, because to refuse it would be impolite. Frederick Carey crossed the room with deliberate slowness and stopped at Henry's elbow. "There she is," Frederick said. "I will say, Ashcombe, your eye is better than I thought. The colour is shocking. Where did she come from?" She weighed the next word for a count of 3. "Bryanston Square." Bryanston Square. Frederick said it as if he were tasting a new wine. "And the small old lady?" "Lady Esme Cottingham." Frederick's smile became very fixed. "Esme Cottingham? You know her?" "I have not seen Esme Cottingham at a London ball in 30 years. Esme Cottingham does not come to balls. Esme Cottingham receives 12 people at Christmas, and otherwise lives in a chair." He looked at Henry. "Henry, whose ward is that girl?" He thought of his sister, and did not say so. "Whose what?" "Whose ward?" "She is Lady Esme's paid companion." "Then why's Esme Cottingham here?" Henry did not answer, because he did not have an answer. Frederick recovered himself. "Well, it changes nothing. The waltz at 11. I shall be watching. So shall everybody else." He clapped Henry once, lightly, on the shoulder. "Go and be charming. You know how to be charming. Anne taught you. We have all seen it." He went. Henry stood another moment. Then he set his shoulders and crossed the floor. The dowager saw him coming. Of course she did. He had the impression that the dowager had been seeing him coming for 40 years. Miss Catherine Merrow saw him a half-second later. He watched her face. He saw, in the small movement of her mouth, the moment she understood who he must be, and the moment she decided that she would neither look away nor lower her eyes. Her chin came up by a hair. He felt it in his chest. "Lady Cottingham," he said, bowing low. "Miss Merrow. Forgive me, we have not been introduced. I am Ashcombe. Permit me to thank you for coming." She thought of her father and did not say so. "Lord Ashcombe," said Lady Esme, in a voice that could have been carved from limestone. "How kind of you to invite us." A pause that did not quite go on long enough to be rude. "My young friend Miss Merrow tells me she has never been to a ball." "Then we are doubly honoured, ma'am, that the first should be ours." He turned to Kit. "Miss Merrow, may I ask Lady Anne, my sister, to bring you her card? The figures begin at past. Kit looked at him directly. She had brown gold eyes. Up close she looked younger than she had on the stairs, and at the same time, considerably less easy to deceive. He had not anticipated either. She said, "Thank you, Lord Ashcombe. I should be glad of it." A log in the fire collapsed inward with a small, dry sound. "Have you danced before, Miss Merrow?" "I have danced a quadrille in a country drawing-room with 3 of my father's parishioners, my lord. I am told it was forgiving of me. It was certainly forgiving of them." He laughed before he had decided whether he was permitted to. It was not the laugh he gave at balls. It was the laugh he gave Anne in their own breakfast room, and he heard it leave him and could not call it back. Lady Esme said, very gently, "My lord, the orchestra is settling. My young friend would not refuse a place in the first set, I think, if you were the one to ask her." He looked at the Dowager. The Dowager looked at him. He understood, in that look, that she knew. He did not know how she knew, but she did. And she was telling him, with an old woman's hard, exhausted clarity, that there were 2 paths in front of him this evening, and that she had chosen, against her better judgment, to allow him the chance to take the right one. He bowed. "Miss Merrow, would you do me the honour of standing up with me for the first set?" "I would, my lord." He held out his arm. She put her gloved fingers on it. They walked into the figure together, and Henry Ashcombe felt, with a clarity that frightened him, that he had stopped being the man who had signed Kerry's book at 11:30 on Tuesday night, and become someone else entirely, and that he had no idea yet what kind of man this new one was going to turn out to be. The first set lasted 23 minutes. Henry counted, because counting kept his hands steady. He had been afraid she would be stiff. She was not. She was not graceful in the trained way of the season's debutantes. She did not have the small, hothouse perfections that came of 3 months at Mrs. Belling's academy. But she had what he realized, halfway through the second figure, was a much rarer thing. She had natural balance, and she listened to the music, and she did not panic when he turned her the wrong way at the top of the line because Penley's sister had crossed in front of them, but caught herself with a small, half-laughing breath and put her hand back into his without comment. He said, under cover of the music, "I'm afraid I led you wrong just then." He noticed, with the small accuracy of a man learning a new room, the pattern on the carpet. "I noticed, my lord." "You did not say so." "It is not a quadrille in a country drawing-room, my lord. I am being forgiven of." He looked at her sharply. She was not smiling. She was watching the next pair come down the line. He realized, with a small, hot lurch under his sternum, that she had just made a joke at his expense, very quietly, and that not one person within 20 feet had heard her do it. He said, "Miss Merrow." "My lord?" "Where did you learn to make conversation in a ballroom?" She noticed, with the small accuracy of a person learning a new room, the pattern on the carpet. "Lady Esme, my lord." "Lady Esme does not come to balls." "No, my lord, but she remembers them." The figure parted them for 16 counts. He watched her cross to Penley, who bowed to her over her hand, because Penley, whatever else he was, had been taught by his mother. And Penley said something he could not hear, and Kit answered, and Penley laughed. Penley did not laugh easily. Henry had known him 18 years. The sound of Penley laughing at something a quiet woman had said while she was being passed up the line was a sound he had not heard before. She came back to him. "What did Sir John ask you?" The window beside him showed, in its lower pane, the reflection of one candle. He asked me whether I knew that the ceiling of this room is taken from a chapel in Bologna. He said it the way men say things they have rehearsed. He waited. The fire in the grate crackled, and behind him, a velvet curtain at the window stirred in a small draught. He had not rehearsed it. She waited. A drop of rain on the window pane caught the lamplight and slid down the cold glass. Then it was very generous of him to give it to me. She tilted her head. Is it from a chapel in Bologna? He did not immediately answer. My grandfather thought so. My grandfather was unreliable about most things, but he was rather precise about ceilings. She did not immediately answer. Then I shall believe him. I have not been to Bologna. The teapot on the table breathed a single thin line of steam. Nor have I. That is a pity, my lord. The figure ended. He bowed. She curtsied. He did not let go of her hand for one beat longer than the form required, and he saw her notice, and he saw her decide not to comment on it. He took her back to Lady Esme. Lady Esme accepted her with the air of a woman receiving a parcel she had been certain would arrive. Miss Merrow danced very well, ma'am. Of course she did, said the dowager, without looking up. She has Welsh feet. Welsh feet keep time better than any other kind. Run along, Lord Ashcombe. There are other people in your house. Some of them are looking at you. He bowed and went. He went only as far as the long window at the end of the ballroom, however, and stood there with his back half-turned, and watched her in the reflection. She did not glance once in his direction. He could not decide whether this pleased him or terrified him. Anne came up behind him. Well? He turned the ring on his small finger once and let it be. Well, what? Henry, you danced one set. Half of London is now wondering who she is. You will dance with at least 4 other women tonight, or it will be a disaster. She turned the ring on the chain at her throat once and let it be. Yes. And the waltz at 11. The room held its breath with them. Yes. Are you going to tell me what is happening to your face? A small carriage clock in the corner caught the half-hour. I do not know yet, Anne. Anne looked at her brother for a long moment. Be careful, she said softly. Not of her. Of you. She moved away. The second set was a country dance. He stood up with Miss Whittaker. She talked the entire time about Boston. He answered when required. He did not look across the room. He did not, in fact, look across the room until the third set, when he stood up with Lady Marbury's eldest, and Lady Marbury's eldest was so practiced at filling a silence that he did not have to do any work at all, and so, under the cover of being conversed at, he looked. Kit was not dancing. She had been asked twice, he had seen it, and had refused both times, gently. She was sitting beside the dowager. 2 other young women had drifted over to her, a cousin of Anne's whom Henry had known since she was 8, and a tall, plain girl from Yorkshire he could not place by name. They were laughing at something Kit had said. Lady Esme was watching them, with the long, patient expression of a person whose plans were proceeding. Henry thought, again, oh. It was an entirely different oh from the first oh. The first oh had been, I have made a serious mistake. The second oh was, this is not the kind of girl one wagers about. He came off the floor at the end of the third set, took a glass of champagne he did not drink, and went to find Anne. Anne, Henry, I'm going to lose the wager. He listened. A coal in the fire broke with a small, bright sound, and the smell of wood smoke deepened in the room. I know. Deliberately. I gathered. She paused. Henry, what are you going to do at the waltz? She listened. The rain on the window had thickened, and somewhere in the house a wooden floorboard creaked. I'm going to dance it with her. The fire took another piece of coal and turned it. Henry, I am going to dance it with her, and I am going to ask her for permission to call on Lady Esme tomorrow afternoon. And I'm going to pay Carey his £500 in the front hall tonight, with 30 people watching. He inclined his head a fraction. Henry. Anne, you said... I said dance with her once and pay Carey and tell him you had lost. I did not say... She inclined her head a fraction. I know. Henry, you met her 2 hours ago. He swallowed. His pulse showed at the throat, just above the line of his stiff white linen. I know. You cannot. I know. They looked at each other. Anne said, Are you going to tell her? About the wager? He did not answer. Anne said, Henry, if she finds out from any mouth other than yours... She swallowed. Her fingers, in their dove-grey gloves, pressed against the cool silver of the chair arm. I know. She will not forgive you. She will be right not to. He held his ground. I know. Then for God's sake, brother, tell her. Tell her tonight. Tell her before the Waltz. Take her into the small library off the gallery. Give her your version of it in plain words, and let her hit you with a poker if she wants to. Better that than what will happen otherwise. He looked at his sister. Anne. What? What if she will not have me afterwards? Anne's face softened. It was, he realized, the first time in 8 months he had said anything that had let her face soften toward him. Henry, she said, if you tell her, and she will not have you afterwards, then she is a woman who could not be had on those terms. You will live. You will become a better man for the loss. And next year, or the year after, you will meet a different woman, and you will be more careful with her because of this one. He swallowed. And if she will have me? Then you will be a fortunate man, brother, and we will be polite to her for the rest of our lives, every one of us. Now go and dance with Lady Pendelworth so that nobody starts a rumour an hour early. He went and danced with Lady Pendelworth. It was 11:15 when Kit Merrow stepped out of the long ballroom into the gallery beyond it, because Lady Esme had asked her to fetch a fan from the cloakroom, and because the noise had begun to press against the inside of Kit's skull in a way that meant she needed 30 seconds of cooler air. The gallery was lined with portraits, old Ashcombs, in old clothes, with the same long jaw and grey eyes she had recognized in their descendant. She walked along it slowly. She did not hear the 2 men behind the half-open door of the smoking room until she was already past the door. She did not stop walking. She would not have. She had been raised by a clergyman to mind her own business in corridors, but her own name came through the gap, in a voice she did not know, and she paused. Catherine Merrow, the voice said. I had to look the name up. It is not in any book. Carey, you outdid yourself. Where did he find her? Carey. She knew that name. Lord Frederick Carey. Lady Esme had said it on Friday afternoon, and Mrs. Pierce had said it in the attic. He found her in some charity column, Carey's voice said lazily. He has a habit of doing the decent thing in the worst possible way. Did you see the colour she wore? I almost thought he had spent some of the 500 already. She held her ground. 500. 500 says she leaves here tonight believing he means to declare himself within the month. The Waltz at 11. Watch his face. Watch hers. His glove creaked once at the knuckle. And the old lady? The old lady is a complication. I did not expect her. I would have expected him to take the girl from a household where no one would notice. But that is Henry. He will have wanted his charity case chaperoned. It does not matter. The old lady cannot stop him from waltzing. The girl will believe what she is meant to believe. Her glove creaked once at the knuckle. The other voice said, slowly, Carey, you do not think there is anything ungentlemanly in this? I do not think it at all, Penley. I think it is the most diverting thing I have done all season. The girl will dine out on the story for the rest of her life. She will tell her grandchildren she danced with the Earl of Ashcombe. The voices laughed. Penley's laugh was the smaller one, and it stopped first. Kit did not move. She did not feel anything yet. She had read once, in a novel of her mother's, that shock had no temperature. She had thought at the time it was a poetic invention. She understood now that it was not. She felt, for perhaps 10 seconds, as if her hands had become a long way away from the rest of her. Then she began to feel the rest. She felt it come up from her stomach in one slow, climbing wave, and she made herself stand very still while it passed, because she had been taught by her father that anything sudden in a corridor was a thing you could not take back. She thought, he chose me. He read my name in a charity list. He invited me here, knowing he was going to dance with me as a wager. He bowed to me on the stairs. He laughed in the figure. He held my hand for one extra beat at the end of the set. She thought, I have danced with him. She thought, I knew. She thought it slowly, with surprise. I knew. Lady Esme told me. Mrs. Pierce told me. I told myself it was probably a jest. I did not tell myself it was certainly a jest, because I did not let myself ask. I went into the figure with him knowing it was possible. I was not deceived. I deceived myself a little. He deceived me very much. She walked the rest of the gallery and went into the cloakroom. The girl on duty fetched Lady Esme's fan. Kit said thank you in a voice she did not entirely recognize. She stood for a moment with her hand against the cold marble of the cloakroom mantelpiece. Then she went back into the gallery, the long way, and she met Lord Ashcombe coming the other direction, alone. He saw her at 12 paces and stopped. She walked the remaining 12 paces toward him. Miss Merrow. Lord Ashcombe. I was looking for you. There is a small library at the end of the gallery. I had hoped, if you were willing, that I might speak with you alone for 2 minutes. Lady Esme has given her permission. I asked her, just now. Kit looked at him. She did not, she discovered, want to faint. She had thought in the cloakroom that she might. She did not. She wanted to look at him. His face was the same face that had bowed to her on the stairs, the face that had laughed in the figure. The grey eyes were the same grey eyes. They were not, she realized, the eyes of a man enjoying a wager. They were the eyes of a man who had run very fast for some distance and had not yet caught his breath. She said, Lord Ashcombe, 2 minutes. Yes. He opened the door of the small library and stood aside for her, and she went in. The library was a square room with a fire in it and one lamp lit. There was a window that looked down into a small walled garden. There were books and a globe and an inkstand with a feather in it. There was a chair on either side of the fire, and Kit did not sit in either. She stood beside the table. He closed the door. He did not come closer. Miss Merrow. My lord. There is no good way to do this. I have spent the last 2 hours trying to find one. I shall say it plainly. Lord Frederick Carey laid a wager at our club on Tuesday night that I could not invite the most invisible orphan in London to my ball and have her in my arms before the waltz ended. I signed the wager. I chose your name from a list in the Times. I issued the invitation. I have danced with you tonight. I am, before God, the man who has done that to you. He stopped. He kept his eyes on her. That is half of what I came to say. The candle on the table beside them dipped and held. And the other half, my lord? The other half is that I did not understand when I signed who you were. I understand it now. I have known you for, by my count, 2 hours and 41 minutes, which is not enough time for any honest man to claim to have changed his life. But it has been enough time for me to know that I cannot dance the waltz with you at 11 o'clock as a man fulfilling a wager. He paused. The fire behind him took a piece of coal and turned it. The small sound of it was loud in the room. He drew a slow breath and went on. I am going down to the hall in 10 minutes, and I'm going to pay Lord Frederick Carey his £500 in front of as many witnesses as I can muster, and I'm going to tell him that I've lost. After that, I'm going to come back upstairs. If, when I come back, you are still in this house, I will ask you to dance the waltz with me as Henry Ashcombe, and not as the Earl of Ashcombe. And if it is the last waltz I ever dance, I will deserve the loss. If you are not still in this house, I will understand it. I will not write. I will not call. I will pay what I owe, and I will live what I have done. He stopped again. That is the whole of it, Miss Merrow. She did not answer at once. She walked to the window. She looked down into the small walled garden. The lamp behind her in the room threw her shadow long across the carpet. The garnet silk caught a little of the lamplight at her elbow. In the garden below the window, 2 stone urns stood on the gravel walk, and a single rosebush, leafless now and pruned hard back, threw an angular black shape against the pale wash of the wall. A scrap of lace had blown into the gravel from some upstairs window and lay there, white and surrendered. Kit watched it. She did not, at this moment, feel anger. Anger, she suspected, would arrive later, in private, perhaps on Monday morning. What she felt now was an unexpected, almost domestic alertness, of the kind she had felt in her father's parsonage on the afternoon her mother had collapsed in the kitchen. A sense of the whole house slowing down around her, every clock suddenly audible, every choice she might next make laid out in front of her, like saucers on a tray, requiring to be picked up by name. She thought about her mother. She thought about her father, and the way he had used to say, in the pulpit, that confession was not the asking of forgiveness, but the willingness to live without it. She thought about Lady Esme, and about Mrs. Pearce, and about Anne Ashcombe, whom she had not yet met, and whom she suspected, for she had seen the small movements of a woman across a ballroom, was the reason this man had told her this. She thought, he could have danced the waltz and let me go home believing he meant to call. She thought, he could have danced the waltz and let me find out tomorrow from a kitchen maid. She thought, he could have done 100 kinder things to himself than this one. She turned from the window. She said, Lord Ashcombe. The window held its rain. The grate held its fire, and shed a low, warm light onto the brass fender and the worn leather of his boot. A faint smell of beeswax came up from the polished floor. Miss Merrow, you will pay Lord Frederick Carey his money. The grate held its fire. Yes. In front of as many witnesses as you can muster. The hall held its silence. Yes. Lady Esme will wish to be one of them. A clock somewhere in the house struck the quarter. I will see to it. Then I will think, while you are paying him, about whether I am still in this house when you return. He bowed his head. That is more than I have any right to, Miss Merrow. It is exactly what I have decided to give you, my lord. He went to the door. He turned, with his hand on the handle. Miss Merrow. Yes? Whichever you choose. I will not. I cannot. I will not be sorry I told you. I will be sorry I had a thing to tell. They are not the same regret. He went out. The door closed. Kit stood by the window for a long time, long enough to hear, distantly, through 3 closed doors, a sudden silence drop over the front hall as the Earl of Ashcombe began to speak. Long enough to know what it was she had decided. The front hall of the Ashcombe house had begun the evening as a place for shedding cloaks and umbrellas, but by 10 minutes past 11, it had become something else. Henry stood under the chandelier with his coat unbuttoned at the top, and a small folded note in his hand. Around him, in a loose, uncertain crescent, stood 38 people. He had asked Anne, very quietly, to bring them. Anne had brought them. There were the 4 men who had been at the table at White's on Tuesday night, Carey himself, Penley, the Norfolk cousins, looking as if they had been pulled by the elbow from a hand of whist they were losing, and the American Whittaker, who Henry had now learned had spent the last 3 days writing a letter to his father in Boston about exactly the sort of London Englishman one should not, on any account, do business with. There was Anne, in her dove-grey silk, with her hands folded at her waist and her face entirely without expression. There was the Dowager Lady Esme Cottingham, leaning on Mrs. Pierce's arm. Mrs. Pierce had been sent for from Bryanston Square 10 minutes earlier in a hackney. Lady Esme had refused to be wheeled into the hall on a chair, and had walked the gallery on her own 2 feet because, she had told Henry as they crossed it together, certain things required height. There was Lady Marbury, who had heard the word wager, and would not have missed this for the crown jewels. There was the orchestra leader, brought down on Anne's orders, because the orchestra had stopped playing, and the orchestra leader was a man whose recollection of a winter Saturday would, by Monday morning, have travelled to every coffee-house in London. The chandelier above the company threw a steady yellow light that flattened everyone's expression, and made the marble floor look like still water. And there was Lord Frederick Carey, white about the mouth, who had understood from the moment Anne touched his elbow in the ballroom and said, "Lord Carey, would you join us in the front hall?" Exactly what was about to happen. "My lords," Henry said. "My ladies, forgive me. I will be very brief." He held up the note. "On the night of Tuesday last, in the card-room at White's, Lord Frederick Carey laid a wager against me. The wager was as follows. I was to invite the most invisible orphan in London to this evening's ball, and I was to have her in my arms before the waltz tonight, which is in 8 minutes. And I was to ensure that she walked home from this house, believing me to be on the verge of declaring myself. The sum at stake was £500. I signed the wager. I chose her name. I issued the invitation. She came. A small sound went through the crescent. It was not quite a gasp. It was the sound that a roomful of well-bred people make when they discover, all at the same time, that they are about to see something they will be telling their grandchildren about. "Lord Carey," Henry said, "I have lost the wager. I have lost it deliberately. I am paying the sum tonight, in front of these witnesses, so that no one in London need rely upon a rumour. The note is for £500, drawn on my account at Coutts. It is here." He extended the note. "Take it." Carey did not take it. "Henry." "Take it, Frederick. You are making a scene. I am ending one. Take it." Carey took it. His glove shook by a hair as he did. He folded the note and put it inside his coat. Henry inclined his head, to him and to the room. "I would beg," he said, "that no man or woman here ever speak Miss Catherine Merrow's name in the same sentence as the word wager again. Miss Merrow was not a party to any of this. Miss Merrow is the guest of my house. Miss Merrow is a woman to whom my family owes a debt, paid or unpaid, for the rest of our lives, for what was done to her this evening before she ever crossed our threshold. I do not, I will not, invite any one of you to forget what you have heard. I am asking only that you weigh, when you speak of it, who behaved well and who behaved otherwise. Good night, Lord Carey." He turned away. "Henry," Carey said in a much smaller voice. "Good night, Lord Carey," Anne said beside him. There was a long moment. Then Frederick Carey bowed, very stiffly, to the room, and walked across the hall to the cloakroom, and called for his coat, and left. The American Whittaker, who had not moved, walked up to Henry, took his hand, shook it once, and said quietly, "I have a new respect for English manners, sir. Forgive me. I shall be off." He went. Penley stood a long moment. Then he came up to Henry. His face was tight. "Henry." "John?" "I should have stood up at the table. I knew it then. I did not. He counted again to 4, the way he had counted on the stairs. "John, another time. Not here." "Yes." Penley swallowed. "Yes." He looked over Henry's shoulder at the staircase. "Henry." "She came down." Henry turned. Kit Merrow was halfway down the staircase, in her garnet silk, with one hand on the banister. Her hair caught the light at the curve of the stair, the way wet earth catches the colour of October. She was not looking at the crescent of witnesses. She was looking only at him. He went to the foot of the stairs. She came down the last 3 steps and stopped on the second to last, so that her eyes were level with his. "Lord Ashcombe." "Miss Merrow." "I have decided that I am still in this house." He swallowed. "Thank you, Miss Merrow." "I have a condition." "Name it." "You will ask Lady Esme's permission yourself, in front of these people, to call on Bryanston Square tomorrow afternoon at 3 o'clock. You will not write to her tonight. You will not write at all. You will call on her in person, and you will ask my permission, separately, in front of her, to call again the next day, and the next, for as many afternoons as I and Lady Esme and you require, to determine whether the man who paid £500 in this hall is the same man as the one who signed the wager. I will not be courted on the strength of one corridor confession. I will be courted on the strength of a great many afternoons. Do you accept the condition?" He could not speak for a moment. "Yes," he said. "I accept the condition." "Then ask her." He turned. Lady Esme had walked across the hall on Mrs. Pierce's arm during this exchange, and was now standing 4 feet away from him, looking at him with the same flat blue gaze she had given him on the stairs at 9:20. He bowed to her, deeply. "Lady Cottingham." "Lord Ashcombe." "May I have your permission, ma'am, to call at Bryanston Square tomorrow afternoon at 3 o'clock, and as many afternoons thereafter as you and Miss Merrow choose to receive me?" The Dowager did not answer at once. "Lord Ashcombe." "Ma'am." "I knew your grandfather. He was a poor husband and a worse father, but he understood, at the close of his life, the difference between a wager and an apology. I have wondered for 40 years whether any man of that name would ever again know the difference in the right order. Apology first, wager paid second, woman last, and only on her terms. You have surprised me this evening, Lord Ashcombe. You will not, however, do so twice. You may call at Bryanston Square tomorrow at 3 o'clock. If Miss Merrow is at home, she will receive you. If she is not, you will leave a card, and you will go." She paused. "And, Lord Ashcombe." She counted again to 4, the way one counts at the top of a staircase before going down. "Ma'am, you will not, on any of those afternoons, refer to what was done in this hall tonight. Once it is done, it is done. We do not, in my house, dwell on the foolishness of young men. We notice it once, audibly, and we move on. Are we clear?" A call shifted in the grate. "Quite clear, ma'am." "Good." She put her hand into his elbow. "Now," she said, "I should very much like to sit down. There is a chair by the bottom of the staircase. You may give me your arm to it. Mrs. Pierce, you may sit beside me. The rest of you, there is a waltz in 3 minutes, I am told. Some of you may wish to dance it. The others may go home and write your letters. I shall not care." She walked to the chair on his arm. Mrs. Pierce settled her into it. The crescent of witnesses began, slowly, with little hesitating movements, to disperse. Some up the staircase, some toward the cloakroom, Lady Marbury already composing in her head what she would write to her sister in Bath at breakfast. Henry turned back to the foot of the stairs. Kit had come down the last 2 steps. "Lord Ashcombe." "Miss Merrow." "There is one further thing." The clock on the mantelpiece ticked. "Yes?" "You may dance the waltz with me. I am, as it happens, very curious to see whether the music sounds different now." He smiled. It was, perhaps, the first true smile he had given in 8 months. "It will not sound the same, Miss Merrow." "No," she said. "I do not imagine it will." He offered her his arm. She took it. They climbed the stairs together. From the chair at the bottom, Lady Esme watched them, with both pale blue eyes very bright, and Mrs. Pierce, beside her, allowed herself for the second time in a week to smile. In the ballroom, the orchestra leader saw them come in, raised his bow, and tapped twice on his music stand. The dancers began to draw into pairs. Henry put his hand at the small of Kit Merrow's back. The first 3 bars of the waltz climbed up into the chandelier. He thought, and the thought was not a wager, it was not a vow, it was not a fear. It was only itself, that he might love this woman for a great deal longer than the music. He did not say it. The condition forbade it. He had a great many afternoons in which to earn the saying of it. He led her into the figure. The waltz began. Anne Ashcombe, watching from the doorway of the ballroom with her hands folded at her waist, said quietly to no one, "Well, that is the end of one evening." She turned. Penley was there, a little behind her, with his coat half over his arm. "Lady Anne." "Sir John." "I shall not come to your house, ma'am, until you tell me I may. I shall not assume." "You will come to my house, Sir John, when you have learned to stand up at a card table at the right moment. We will help you practice. There are gaming nights at my aunt's house in Half Moon Street every Wednesday at 8. You may come the first time as a witness. The second time you may sit down. By Christmas, we shall see." Penley bowed. He bowed deeply enough that he did not show his face. "Lady Anne, thank you." "Go home, Sir John. Have your servant put a cold cloth on the back of your neck. Drink water. Sleep. Tomorrow is the rest of your life, and it will be a slightly better one than yesterday's." He went. Anne watched the waltz for a moment longer. She thought, with a private, careful pleasure, "I had begun to be afraid that my brother was going to disappear into the title. He has not. He has come the other way out of it. I am, and this is a privilege I will be a long time understanding, the older sister of a man who, when it cost him, chose the harder of 2 doors." She set her hand on the doorframe and watched them turn at the corner of the floor. The garnet silk caught the candlelight. The music climbed. Bryanston Square at 3 o'clock on the following Tuesday afternoon was raining a fine, persistent, undecided rain, and Lord Henry Ashcombe stood on the doorstep of number 8 with his hat in one hand and a small parcel in the other, and rang the bell, and waited. The door was opened by Mrs. Pierce, who looked at him for 1 full second before standing aside. "Lord Ashcombe." "Mrs. Pierce." "Lady Esme is in the back parlour. Miss Merrow is at her embroidery. You are expected." "Thank you." She took his coat. She did not take his hat. He held it in both hands as he followed her down the corridor, and felt very acutely that he was 27 years old, and had never, in his life, called on a lady's house with this sort of weight in his chest. Mrs. Pierce opened the parlour door. "Lady Esme. Miss Merrow. Lord Ashcombe." He came in. The dowager was in her chair by the fire, with a small grey shawl over her knees. Miss Catherine Merrow was in the window seat with her embroidery hoop in her lap, and the November light was on her shoulders, and she set down the hoop when he came in, and rose and curtsied. "Lord Ashcombe." "Miss Merrow." "You have brought something." "2 things. The first is a book Lady Esme expressed a fondness for last week. Mrs. Pierce was good enough to tell me the title. The second is for you, Miss Merrow, if you will permit it. I would not have presumed to bring it, but the morning was very long." He held out the parcel. She took it. She unwrapped it. It was a small thing, square, in paper that had been reused twice. It was a slim, very old, very battered volume of Cooper's Only Hymns. Kit looked up at him. "It was my father's favourite," she said. The candles guttered and steadied. "You mentioned it. In the corridor on Saturday, after I—" He stopped. He had remembered the dowager's instruction about not referring to Saturday. "Forgive me." "I shall forgive you the once, Lord Ashcombe," said the Dowager from her chair, "because the gift is well chosen. Now sit down, there is tea coming. Mrs. Pierce, you will sit also. Catherine, bring your hoop here. We shall have an afternoon. Lord Ashcombe will read to us. I am sick of my own voice, and I am sick of yours, child. Do not look at me like that. You read too well. Lord Ashcombe, you read whatever you like that is not a sermon and not a newspaper. There is Walter Scott on the second shelf. Begin." He sat. He took down Walter Scott from the second shelf. He found his page. He read for 40 minutes. He was, he discovered, not very good at it at first. His voice did not yet know the shape of being in this small room, with these 3 women, with the rain on the window and the fire ticking, and Kit Merrow's embroidery hoop turning slowly in her lap. He stumbled twice in the first 10 minutes. The Dowager corrected his Scottish pronunciation once, and did not bother on the others. By the third quarter hour, he had found the shape of it. He looked up once, in a pause between chapters, and met Kit's eyes across the room, and saw, for a small, suspended second, what Anne had seen at the ball. That the colour of garnet silk and the colour of November light were not unrelated, and that some women carried both inside them, and that an afternoon with the rain on the window and a Walter Scott on the lap was, in the end, the only honest test there was of any wager you had ever signed and any door you had ever chosen to walk through, on the harder side. He looked back at his page. He read on. The afternoons multiplied. There was a Wednesday, and a Thursday, and a Saturday, and a Monday. There were small walks in the square with Mrs. Pierce 10 paces behind. There was a Sunday at the Bryanston Square Church, where he sat in the pew behind Lady Esme, and did not look at the back of Kit's head, although he was acutely aware of where her shoulders ended and her bonnet began. There was a Wednesday when Anne came with him and sat on the sofa and produced, from her reticule, a thing nobody had asked her to produce. A small, soft, folded shawl in a colour halfway between cream and primrose. She said she had bought it because the shop had been closing and a shawl had been needed by someone. She put it on Kit's lap and refused to say more. There was a Thursday when Sir John Penley called also, by separate appointment. He bowed to Kit in the doorway, stayed for exactly 23 minutes, did not say one foolish word, and went away again. The Dowager nodded once after he had gone. Penley wrote, on his card the next day, that he had liked her drawing room. There was a Saturday, 3 weeks to the day after the ball, when the rain stopped and the sky went bright and pale, and Henry asked Lady Esme's permission to take Miss Merrow into Hyde Park, with Mrs. Pierce in attendance, and the permission was given on 3 conditions, all reasonable. They walked the long path. Mrs. Pierce, 10 paces behind, was a tactful person on the days she chose to be. The leaves had begun to come down, although they had begun in the way leaves begin in London, reluctantly, half a fistful at a time, dampened by the air. The gravel of the path was wet and gave a soft, conceding sound under their boots. 2 boys went past with a kite they had not yet decided to fly. A pair of ducks crossed the water in the round pond and disappeared into the brown reeds at the far side. The air smelled of cold leaves and chimney smoke, and faintly, of horses from the row beyond the trees. He said, near the round pond, "I have not done this before." Somewhere in the next room a door closed. She said, "I gathered, my lord." He did not look away. "Done it like this, with time, with permission, with a chaperone who likes me." She did not look away. "Does Mrs. Pierce like you, my lord?" "Mrs. Pierce has invited me, twice now, to have a second cup of tea. I am told by Anne that this is a sign of an attachment beyond the ordinary." Kit laughed. It was the same laugh he had heard on the staircase, the same laugh he had heard in the figure of the country dance. It was, by now, his favourite laugh of all the laughs he had ever heard, and he had heard a great many. "My lord." "Miss Merrow?" "I had a question. I have not asked it because I was afraid that I would not like the answer." It is now the third Saturday and the leaves are coming down. I had better ask it before they are all on the ground. He drew a breath. Ask, Miss Merrow. Why me? He did not answer at once. That is, Miss Merrow, there are two answers. One of them is the answer of the man who signed Carey's book on Tuesday night. I will tell you that one first. The man who signed Carey's book chose your name because he saw it in the Times as one of 3 subscribers to a Bayswater clergyman's charity for boys' boots. He chose it because the name was, he thought, the kind of name nobody would have heard of and nobody would defend. He chose it because he was the worst version of himself that night, Miss Merrow. And he chose by the worst rule he had ever used. She drew a breath. And the second answer? The second answer is from the man who saw you come up the stairs, who heard you laugh at something Lady Esme had said, who watched you not look at me even once during the third set, although your back was very straight in a way I think had taken effort, who handed his £500 to Carey because, in the small library off the gallery, you had not let me apologize to anyone but you, who has, every Wednesday, found himself in your drawing room, and has noticed that he is no longer, on those Wednesdays, the man who signed the book. He stopped. Miss Merrow, the second man chose you because of who you are. The first man chose you because of who you were not. The second man would like, very much, to apologize to you on behalf of the first. I do not know if I have the right to ask you to accept the apology on the first man's behalf. I only know that I would like to live the rest of my life such that, when I look back at the first man's choice, I am glad of it for the second man's reasons. A breeze took half a fistful of leaves from a plane tree above them. Mrs. Pierce, 10 paces behind, was very interested in a railing. Kit said, Lord Ashcombe. The silence lasted 2 beats longer than was comfortable. Miss Merrow. There is a phrase my father used in his sermons. He used it perhaps once a year. He used it on the Sundays when a thing had to be said plainly. Do you know what the phrase was? The fire ticked. No, Miss Merrow. It was, the gift of the second chance is given to the giver before the receiver. He meant, my lord, that the act of giving the second chance changes the person who gives it before it changes the person who is given it. If I forgive you, Lord Ashcombe, it will not first change you. It will first change me. It will be my act and my choice, and I will carry the weight of it. The man who carries the weight of forgiveness, my father said, is the one forgiving, not the one forgiven. Do you understand? Her gloves whitened in her lap. I understand. I have considered, this last fortnight, whether I am a woman who wishes to carry that weight. His fingers closed once around the rim of his glass. And I have concluded that I am. He did not, he found, have words. Miss Merrow, I have not finished, my lord. Outside, in the square, a carriage rolled past. Forgive me. I will forgive you. I have decided. But I will not forgive you in front of anyone but Lady Esme and my own conscience. I will not forgive you on a public stage. I will not forgive you as a story to be told at dinner. I have been the story to be told at dinner once already in my life, my lord, and I do not intend to be it twice. Are we agreed? The rain on the window pane sounded suddenly very loud. Agreed, Miss Merrow. Good. Mrs. Pierce, you may walk a little closer if you like. Lord Ashcombe and I have settled a small thing, and we are easier with each other now. Mrs. Pierce walked a little closer. The 3 of them went on along the path. At the gates of the park, Henry stopped. Miss Merrow. My lord. I had hoped, this afternoon, but I might ask you a thing. I do not intend to ask it yet. It is not the right Saturday. But I would like you to know that I have it in my mind, and that on a Saturday when you tell me the leaves have come fully down, I will ask it. May I ask it then? A footman in the hall coughed and was hushed. You may ask it then, Lord Ashcombe. I make no promise about the answer. I do not ask one yet. He bowed. She curtsied. Mrs. Pierce nodded once, which was as much as Mrs. Pierce ever did, and the three of them stepped out of the park onto the pavement, and Henry called for the carriage, and the carriage came, and he handed Kit into it, and Mrs. Pierce after her, and he stood on the curb in the thin yellow light of a winter London afternoon, and watched the carriage go. Anne was waiting for him in the breakfast room at Berkeley Square. Well? Well? Henry. She will forgive me, Anne. Not publicly, privately. She has decided. Anne set down her teacup. He saw, with a small, sharp tenderness, that her hand was not quite steady. And the rest? The rest is Saturdays, as many as it takes. He set his hand on the back of the chair. And then I will ask her. On a Saturday, when she tells me the leaves are down. Anne smiled. The smile took a long, slow moment to arrive at her mouth. Henry? Yes? I am glad you signed Carey's book. She set her hand on the back of the chair. Anne, you are not. I am. Not because of what it was, because of what it forced. I would not have wished it on her. I would not have wished it on you. But I will spend the rest of my life glad of who it has made you, and who it has brought to my door. Now, Carey called this morning, by the way. He looked at the floor. Did he? He left a card. Did he write anything? He wrote, "Pardon." That is all. She looked at the window. What will you do? I will write back, Anne. I will write, "Granted in time." That is also all. Carey understands letters of one word. He looked at her hands. And you will see him? In time. Not yet. Penley first. Carey when he has spent a winter remembering. Anne nodded. That seems just about right, brother. Yes. He sat down opposite her. He took her teapot. He poured himself a cup. Anne. Yes? Thank you. For what? For making me a list with her name on it. For correcting my face on the stairs. For finding Penley in the doorway after the waltz. For the 8 months before that, when I was a man you did not know what to do with, and you did not give up on him. Thank you, Anne. Anne's eyes filled very briefly. You may pour me a cup also, brother. There is no need to make a speech. He poured her a cup. They sat for a long time at the breakfast room table, with the November light yellow on the silver, and a great deal more was understood than was said. The leaves were down on the 3rd Saturday of December. Henry Ashcombe drove himself, in a small open carriage, with Mrs. Pierce on the seat beside Kip Merrow and the spare seat behind for Anne, to a copse at the edge of the Ashcombe country estate in Hertfordshire, where the family had a small folly built in 1788 by Henry's great-aunt, which the family no longer used, but which Kit had asked, the previous Tuesday afternoon in the Bryanston Square parlour, whether she might one day be permitted to see, because she had read of follies in a book, and never been inside one. The folly was a small octagonal stone room, with 8 tall windows and a chimney and a fireplace, and 1 bench around the inside. Henry had had the chimney swept and the fireplace laid in advance. He had brought up tea things. Anne and Mrs. Pierce, by a tactful and entirely unspoken arrangement, settled themselves on a flat stone outside the folly with their backs to it, and produced, between them, a small picnic. Henry handed Kit down from the carriage. He led her into the folly. He laid the fire. He waited until it caught. The folly, inside, smelled of cold stone and of the slightly resinous sweetness of the kindling, and, as the fire took, of wood smoke and old plaster warming. The 8 tall windows showed 8 slightly different versions of the same brown winter landscape. The copse, the field, the line of the lane, the smoke from the gatehouse chimney a mile away. The bench around the inside of the octagon was bare. Henry had brought a folded carriage rug. He laid it along the bench. The light, falling in at the southeast window, caught a small column of dust above the flames. He came and sat beside her on the bench inside. "Miss Marrow." "Lord Ashcombe." "The leaves are down." "They are. There was a thing I told you 3 weeks ago that I had in my mind to ask." "There was?" "I had thought, for several afternoons, about how to ask it. I have been told by Anne, several times, that I am incapable of asking any important question without a small speech beforehand, and that on this occasion I am not to make a small speech. I am told the right form is plain." "I should agree with Anne, my lord." "Then—" He turned to face her on the bench. The firelight in the octagon was warm, and one shaft of low December sun came in at the southeast window and made the buttons of his coat very bright. "Catherine Marrow." "Henry Ashcombe." "Will you marry me?" She did not, this time, walk to a window. She did not, this time, take a turn around the room. She did not, this time, consider Lady Esme's instruction or her father's sermons or her mother's mouth. She said, "Yes." She said it quickly, and then she said it again, more quietly, as if she had to hear it twice before she could believe she had said it. "Yes." He took her hand. He took it in both his, and he held it as if it were a thing that had been promised to him for a great while, and that he had only just been given. "Catherine." "Henry." There are still some things to be said." "I know." "There will be people in London who will say that you accepted me because I am the Earl of Ashcombe." "There will be." "There will be people who say I asked you because I owed you." "There will be." "What shall we do about them?" "Henry, we shall live our lives. We shall live them in such a way that the people who watch us over 5 years and 10 years will come very slowly to a different conclusion. We will not try to convince anyone in the first year. We will not, you and I, be people who give explanations. We will be people who give afternoons. Years of afternoons. The story will tell itself." He bowed his head over her hand. "Catherine." "Yes. That is exactly the answer I had hoped you would give, and had been afraid you would not. You should learn, my lord, to be less afraid of the answers I give. They will, in general, be the answers you hoped for. I have discovered, a woman who hopes the same things as you do." The fire ticked in the grate. Outside, on the flat stone, Anne Ashcombe poured Mrs. Pearce a second cup of tea from a small flask, and Mrs. Pearce, who had not smiled in 3 years before this autumn, smiled for the 3rd time in 5 weeks. The wedding was small. Lady Esme insisted on it. She said large weddings were for people who did not know each other well and needed witnesses to remember. Small weddings, she said, were for people who knew each other well and only needed a clergyman. The clergyman was the one from Bayswater who had taken Kit in 5 years before. He cried twice during the service and apologized both times. Kit told him not to apologize. Anne stood as Kit's witness, because Kit's only sister was a sister of the heart, and a sister of the heart was, Anne said, exactly what a witness was. Sir John Penley stood as Henry's. Frederick Carey was not invited. He had written, in October, a longer letter than the one of November's one-word card. Henry had read it once and put it in a drawer. He had not, then, answered it. He had answered it in March, when the snow had gone off the daffodils in Berkeley Square, and his hand on the page felt, for the first time, like the hand of a man who was no longer angry. He had written, "I have read your letter. I accept what it says. I will not, however, sit at the same card table as you for 10 years. After that, we shall see. Yours, in time, Ashcombe." Carey had written back, "That is fairer than I deserve. Yours, Carey." The two men did not, in fact, sit at the same card table again for 11 years. By then, a great deal of the world had changed, and the new Carey, who had spent 2 of those years in the country with a sister of his who had been ill, and who had paid the doctors out of his own pocket without telling anyone, was a sufficiently different man that Henry could shake his hand without feeling the room go cold. The world worked, sometimes, in those small, slow ways. The first child was a girl. She was named Esme, against Lady Esme's vigorous protest, which Lady Esme had nevertheless been planning to lose for several months. The dowager held the child once and said, "She has Welsh feet. I can feel them." The second child was a boy. He was named Thomas, after Kit's father. The third child was a girl. She was named Anne. Anne Ashcombe, by then 33, came into the upstairs nursery on the morning of the christening, and stood by the cot for a long time, and did not, at first, say anything, and then said, "Oh, Henry." That was all she said. It was, Henry told Kit that night, the most embarrassing compliment Anne had ever paid him. Lady Esme lived to see all 3. She left them on a Tuesday afternoon in May, in her own chair, in her own back parlour at Bryanston Square, with Mrs. Pearce in the kitchen, and Kit in the doorway, and the small Esme on her knee. She had been napping, she said, and would Catherine please tell Lord Ashcombe that she had been quite cross with him this week, and he was on no account to be allowed to think otherwise. And then she had closed her eyes, and not opened them again. Mrs. Pearce had come in and sat down on the rug at her feet for a long time. After that, Mrs. Pearce had come to live at Berkeley Square. She lived there for 19 years. She smiled, on average, twice a month for the rest of her life, which was, Henry once observed in a letter to his sister, an 8-fold increase over her previous form. The garnet gown was kept. Kit had it taken down from the attic at Bryanston Square the week after her wedding and wrapped in fresh tissue and put into a black trunk in her own attic at Berkeley Square. She did not wear it again. She did not need to. She brought it down once a year, on the 17th of November, and let it hang on the back of her dressing-room door for one afternoon, and she sat with it for a quarter of an hour alone, and remembered the stairs. 23 years after that ball, on the 17th of November, the eldest Ashcombe girl, Esme, by then 22, was to be presented at a ball of her own. The garnet gown came down. Kit took it in to her daughter and laid it on the bed and said only, "It is yours, if you would like it. It is the colour of a window in a chapel at evensong. It is also the colour, my dear, of forgiveness." Esme Ashcombe wore the gown that night. The story of where it came from she heard in pieces, from her mother, over many afternoons of her own. Never as a single story, never as a moral, never as a warning. She heard it the way her father and mother had decided, 23 years before, that any story of theirs would be told. In pieces, over years, in afternoons, with the rain on the window and the fire ticking, and a Walter Scott on the lap, and a chaperone of some kind, somewhere in the room, who liked you well enough. Years after, in the long Berkeley Square evenings, when the children were upstairs and the candles were lit, and Henry sat in his chair on one side of the fire, and Kit sat in hers on the other, and the small Esme, who by then was no longer small, read aloud to them from whatever novel she had taken from the shelf. Kit would catch his eye, occasionally, over the rim of her teacup, and Henry would catch hers, and neither of them would say anything, because they had long since reached the point in a marriage when the looks themselves are the sentence. The rain would be on the window, the fire would be ticking. Mrs. Pearce, in her chair by the lamp, would have her eyes half closed in the way she did when she was listening attentively and pretending not to be. That, it turned out, was how a London life kept itself honest. That, it turned out, was how a wager became a marriage. That, it turned out, was how a girl in a borrowed gown, invited to a ball on a wager, proposed to before the waltz ended, and given a great many afternoons in which to decide whether she was forgiving the same man twice or a different man once, chose, in the end, to be loved. If you have ever stood at the top of a staircase in a borrowed colour, and decided to keep walking, I would like to hear about it in the comments. Subscribe for more stories like this. New ones every week by the fire.